Hello, everyone. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. This is episode 9 with Erick Ybarra. It's a back-to-back Ybarra attack. And this is episode 2, part 2 of Papal Supremacy at the Second Council of Nicaea in 787 AD. So, Erick, how are you doing this fine and lovely evening?
I'm doing great. I'm happy to be back here to talk about this subject. Very interesting one. A lot to say, a lot to ask. So I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, definitely. Part of me in nerding out over this, part of me slightly feels bad, but only slightly, because I was like, there really could be a part 3 and a part 4 and a part 5 and stuff. And I'm just like, maybe do you want to do that in the future? It doesn't have to be now, like in December, of course, but as I was going through my list of questions that I made for this episode, I was just like, there's so much we could really do. And I haven't, just for clarification for everyone too, I still need to read the Acts of the Council of Nicaea II that were translated and published by Richard Price. I have them on my Amazon wish list, and I have yet to buy them. I've yet to have bought them, and I'm going to read it. And for everyone, here's Erick has it right there.
Yeah, this is by Father Richard Price.
Yeah, it's I've seen citations from it in your articles and from others online, and it is just an amazing primary source, and it's just invaluable. It's really not entirely forget about, but in terms of secondary literature, this is an amazing primary source / secondary literature as well. So it's amazing. Erick knows more about it than I do, but I've just been enthralled by it. And that's one of the reasons that I really loved your presentations, Erick, that you've done on Swan's channel and that you did on his channel again, actually, a few of them that we showed in the first episode on the issue of papal supremacy at Nicaea II. And again, with your very aesthetically pleasing slides. But they're just so shiny. I was just like, not only is this an intelligent and cogent presentation, but it looks pretty too. So look at that.
Yeah, it was last minute. I didn't know PowerPoint had these capabilities, and then I looked at what I could do. So I just spent extra time making it look nice.
Yeah, definitely. It's I've been playing with it too for my own YouTube channel with the thumbnails and making it editing the contrast and when you copy and paste on PowerPoint, there's a viewer suggestion. It's oh, would you like your slides to look like this in 75 billion different ways? And that's oh, actually, maybe so.
Yeah, it's an editor's dream.
Definitely, yeah. And so, just a brief recap. In the last episode, I asked Erick questions such as, what inspired you to write these articles, his 2 articles on Nicaea II and the papacy? I asked him, what is Nicaea II? What is papal supremacy? And did it exist at this period in time in church history, namely in the late 8th century, the high 8th century? And for all those out there who are younger, it doesn't mean high on weed. It means it's a historical reference that refers to a late period in antiquity or in a century. I just have to say that because I've heard some people being like, what? They were high? No, kids, no. But anyway, and so Erick also answered some objections by others against some of his arguments that he made in his first 2 articles on papal supremacy at Nicaea II. And if you haven't watched that yet, the link for that video, that interview that me and Erick just did, that will be in the description below. Also, earlier today, I uploaded an audio version of that same interview that we did. So a link to that as well in the show notes / description. So with all of that said, by way of background introductions and other type of rambling, I want to ask you a pretty basic question, Erick, and it's something we just mentioned. You just showed the copy of Richard Price's Acts of the Second Council of Nicaea. So let me ask you this, just to begin our conversation. What is an act of an ecumenical council? And what are the acts of the Second Council of Nicaea?
Yeah. So, I mean, the acts, from the Latin word acta, is basically it just means an action. It just means an action that the council does. And it consists of, some sort of introduction. See, the ecumenical councils, they resemble the old imperial senatorial meetings of the Roman Senate. So it's got this imperial Roman organization to it. It lists the participants, and then it records the minutes of the council, the goings on, the statements, who says what's agreed upon. Not every word that's literally said is recorded, but much of it is. And so it's just an action that takes place, where, you could divide it into, this is what happens in a certain session, there's the actions of the council. It's very similar to the way Luke did his account of Christ and the apostles. He didn't call it I'm not sure if he did or not. I think he introduces it to Theophilus in Acts chapter 1, that all the things that Christ did from the time of his baptism to his being taken up, and then he provides an introduction to the what the apostles did, and we call it the Acts of the Apostles, by tradition. And those are just basically the actions of the apostles, after the day of Pentecost. So yeah, that's what an action is of a council, and an ecumenical council. This is a very elaborate subject. It's basically a gathering together of the bishops to discuss matters and to come to final decisions on important items like doctrine, discipline, liturgy, custom, new situations that the church faces that had not been there hitherto. Mm-hmm. In the old seven, that the Orthodox and the Catholics count in the first millennium, those are special. Of course, there was many councils, and many of them were called ecumenical when they were convened. Mm-hmm. You could tell by the letters preparing for them what was intended was a council of the oikumeni, which is a council of the Roman world, basically. But we don't count all of them. There might be like 50 or 60 something of those. So we count those seven because they coincided with an acceptance by the Pope and the other Eastern patriarchs, and the majority of Christians over time, but principally because of the acceptance of the episcopate that stayed with the reigns of the Pope, the successor of Peter. So, from a Catholic point of view, an ecumenical council in the first millennium, it is a secular event. It's a religious event as well. Those two things coincide because you have the two powers coming together. The power of the prince or the Caesar Augustus, and then the power of the episcopoi, the bishops. And those two things come together in an ecumenical council. So, the bishops took on the senatorial framework. The emperor took a major lead in these events. But it was always understood, at least by many, and I would say the right-thinking people, that the bishops, in particular those who surround the successor of Peter, who had the final say on the council standing, and whether it's to be respected with an irreformable authority, Emperors put a lot of councils into law that never got accepted by the church. For example, you have the ecumenical council, and I say ecumenical, just that's how it was called, that's how it was finished. Rimini in 359, which was a semi-Arian council.
Yeah.
And that was put into imperial law. The Council of Ephesus 449 was put into imperial law under Theodosius II. The Council of Hieria in 754 was put into imperial law. So, but we don't count those as ecumenical. So there had to be what the Byzantines call a symphonia with the emperor and the bishops, and particularly the bishops surrounding the Pope of Rome. So that's what Catholics now define as an ecumenical council. Of course, the Orthodox define it slightly differently. And obviously Anglicans and Protestants define it differently as well. But and then you've got atheists out there who are just really interested in church history. For them, it would just be almost exclusively a Roman imperial event, you know.
Wow. Yeah, I really appreciate that discursive, brief analysis. That was really good, and also I like your little, your Catholic accent on it with the communion with the Bishop of Rome there.
Yeah,
for that, for the ecumenical councils. Yeah, and so thank you for that, Eric. And I feel kind of bad or dumb, but because in the last episode that we did, we mentioned a lot of Pope Hadrian I at the Second Council of Nicaea. So, Eric, my next question for you is, who is Pope Hadrian I?
Yeah, good question. I've not really done extensive studies on his biography, but I do know that he came to the throne of Peter in the latter part of the 8th century, and he was consulted by Empress Irene over the issue of iconoclasm in the East, in particular the state of Constantinople. And he wrote some very important documents in 785. They didn't actually get read until at the council until 787. But he wrote, I think he wrote a letter to the emperors. That's Irene and her son, and to Patriarch Tarasius. And those letters are, they have everything to do, I think with what my articles talk about. And he had some, he had some specific complaints, but he did give a florilegium of church fathers and arguments towards the laicity and the validity of venerating images from a patristic and mainly patristic, but also biblical point of view. And then, he also complained about one of the things that started the schism between Constantinople and Rome in the 7th and 8th century, which was the confiscation, illegal confiscation of patriarchal responsibility that used to be in the hands of Rome, of churches in Sicily, Calabria, Italy, and in the prefecture of Illyricum, which later would be the strand of territory that comprises the Balkans, and roughly, we'll start calling it the Balkans much later. But the Bulgars, they laid claim to northern regions of this particular area, but classically, it was the prefecture of Illyricum and principally the Archbishop or Metropolitan of Thessaloniki. And the popes would consult with the Archbishop of Thessaloniki as sort of like a vice regent, or sort of like a vice metropolitan that answers to the papal court.
Mhm.
And so Emperor Leo III, otherwise popularly known as Leo the Isaurian, as we were talking about last meeting,
Right.
um,
Yeah.
sort of as a quasi punishment of Pope Gregory III, who condemned and excommunicated any of the iconoclasts. As a punishment to the Pope, he tore away the monetary funds that come to Rome from Calabria and Sicily, and also took away those patriarchal, the oversight of ordinations in Calabria, Sicily, and in Thessaly. And so Pope Hadrian, if Empress Irene, who's going to represent the throne of the Roman Byzantine Empire, if she's going to knock on his door asking for help about the doctrinal issue with iconoclasm, he's certainly going to ask for her to overturn the imperial injustice that had taken place, under Leo III. And then he had issues with Tarasios, in particular, his accession to the patriarchal throne. It was like within a week that he was ordained. He went for the late, and this was, Pope, Pope Hadrian thought it was uncanonical, but he was willing to accept it on certain conditions, and then the other complaint he had was that he was using the title ecumenical patriarch, which in the East, I don't understand why it wasn't resolved earlier. With an explanation that this doesn't mean, universal bishop or universal patriarch. But I have a feeling that perhaps there were some people who viewed it that way. So maybe, this is one of the reasons why the resident bishops that stayed in Constantinople, that would go to and fro from Rome to Constantinople, perhaps they knew that some people in the East took it that way. And this is one of the reasons why I think the popes continue to have complaints about it.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. And, so that's Hadrian. That's his relevance to this period. He's also got a whole contribution to the Frankish Empire that, was rising and rising and rising, and was growing in prominence, and in particular, some sort of resistance to Rome on this issue of the icons, and on the issue of the filioque and the creed. So,
yeah, that's fascinating. Yeah, I was about to say, I always one of the things I always enjoy about you, Eric, in having interviews with you. I mean, we've only done 2. This is 2 now, but also your other videos is just there's always something more to learn from you. So I appreciate that. So
thank you.
And so that's a really good synopsis. And so now I want to. This is going deeper on the issue of papal primacy, and specifically with Pope Hadrian. My question for you, Eric, is what is or was Pope Hadrian's view of papal primacy? Is it consistent with the Catholic view of today, i.e. Vatican I? And not only consistent, like beyond that, is it the same doctrine and substance? And if you don't mind, or if you want to, feel free to, share your screen or whatever. You can give any citations or references on this issue that you like.
Yeah, I might do that. I would say that it's substantially the same. And the reasons why I would say that is because Vatican I, which had more to say than the rights and prerogatives of the Apostolic See or the Roman Pontiff. But when it does get to the dogmatic constitution on the church, the rights and the prerogatives of the Roman Pontiff, later on, people called it Pastor Eternus, because in the beginning section, it talks about the intentions of the eternal pastor, which is Jesus Christ. A lot of people think Pastor Eternus has some reference to the Pope, but it doesn't. It means eternal shepherd, meaning the Lord Jesus, and what was his intention with the Apostle Peter. But if you read Pastor Aeternus, it's not just Pope's infallible; he can do whatever he wants. That would be a gross misreading, misinterpretation, and distortion of what the doctrine and what that document is teaching. So you have to start from the first action of that document, and it builds an argument. It starts off the eternal shepherd who willed the church to be one and undivided, right? Mm-hmm. And it starts with this design with the apostles, and then this unique singling out of the Apostle Peter. Mm-hmm. And the document basically just unpacks that election of Peter, and what that entails for the universal church and for the church until the end of time. And if you read Pope Hadrian, that's all he does too. He points out certain prerogatives that are given to Peter and the implications that it has on the universal church and until the end of time. And so that's really the panorama of the papacy, that it's divinely instituted in the person of Peter. Its reach is the whole church, so every baptized Christian, and that it's intended to last until the end of time. I mean, those three characteristics mark the papacy.
Yeah.
Of course, there's some details under that. People squabbled for centuries over precisely what commands the Pope could legitimately issue, and whether it had to stop at the king's court before it got to the bishops underneath, whether it had to stop at the metropolitan's chancery before it was binding on bishops underneath, whether it had to be accepted by the bishop before it was acceptable to the laity underneath the bishop. These were all questions that Jesus doesn't answer them in the Gospels, obviously. Mm-hmm. The church fathers don't answer them precisely. And Pope Hadrian doesn't go into that either. But what he does say is enough. It's enough to say that it's not the Orthodox doctrine. It's definitely not the Eastern Orthodox doctrines. It's not the Egyptian, the Syriac, Coptic, Oriental Orthodox position. Mm-hmm. And it's certainly not the Protestant position.
Right, yeah.
So if we're just going based off of, approximations, let alone, an eyeballing it, he lands right there with Pastor Aeternus, and that's because, here, maybe I'll share my screen here.
Go ahead. Feel free.
Yeah, let me hit share screen. Here we go, share. And people should see this. Can you verify if you see it, James?
Yep, I can see it. And before you go on, I'm going to create an audio version of this as well, but I will link the description to this visual video interview as well, and vice versa. And also to your articles as well. So those that are hearing this or listening to this in the future will be able to follow up later. And also Eric will be descriptive, I'm sure, in reading this. So you wouldn't miss much, really. So anyway, Eric, with that said, go ahead.
Yeah. So, here I've got some columns. So when the listeners want to read this article, or if they just want to listen to me now, I have side by side in two columns the Latin version of Pope Hadrian's letter to the emperors, and I have the Greek version next to it side by side. And in the middle, I write some comments on what are different about the two versions. But I'll read the Latin version because that's what all of scholarship agrees that Pope Hadrian actually wrote. And this, I'll start here. This is what Pope Hadrian says to the emperors. If you persevere in that Orthodox faith in which you have begun, and the sacred and venerable images be by your means erected again in those parts, as by the Lord, the Emperor Constantine of pious memory, and the Blessed Helen, who promulgated the Orthodox faith and exalted the Holy Catholic and Apostolic Roman Church, your spiritual mother, and with the other Orthodox emperors, venerated it as the head of all churches. So will your clemency, that is protected of God, receive the name of another Constantine and another Helen, through whom at the beginning of the Holy Catholic and Apostolic Church derived strength, and like whom your own imperial fame is spread abroad by triumphs, so as to be brilliant and deeply fixed in the whole world. But the more, if following the traditions of the Orthodox faith, you embrace the judgment of the Church of Blessed Peter, chief of the apostles, and as of old your predecessors, the holy emperors, acted, so you, too, venerating it with honor, love, with all your heart, his vicar, and if your sacred majesty follow by preference their Orthodox faith, according to our holy Roman Church, may the chief of the apostles himself, to whom the power was given by our Lord God to bind and remit sins in heaven and earth, be often your protector and trample all barbarous nations under your feet, and everywhere make you conquerors. For let sacred authority lay open the marks of his dignity, and how great veneration ought to be shown to the highest see, by all the faithful in the world. For the Lord set him who bears the keys of the kingdom of heaven as chief over all, and by him is he honored with this privilege, by which the keys of the kingdom of heaven are entrusted to him. He therefore that was preferred with so exalted an honor was thought worthy to confess that faith on which the Church of Christ is founded. A blessed reward followed that blessed confession, by the preaching of which the Holy Universal Church was illumined, and from it the other churches of God have derived the proofs of faith. For the blessed Peter himself, the chief of the apostles, who first sat in the apostolic see, left the chiefship of his apostolate and pastoral care to his successors, who are to sit in his most holy seat forever. And that power of authority, which he received from the Lord God our Savior, he too bestowed and delivered by divine command.
Yeah, there it is.
To the pontiffs, his successors. All right, close quote, and I'll stop sharing my screen here. Okay, so basically you have the contour of Pater Eternus. You know, you have the will of God for the church. You have the singling out of Peter. You have the bestowal of authority on Peter, symbolized in the keys.
Mm-hmm.
That authority extends to the whole universal church, right? It's divinely instituted by divine command. And it's left to outlive him. It's not just there for Peter and then dies with Peter. It's left to outlive him in his successors, the Roman pontiffs, who will sit in his holy throne forever. So the idea there is perpetuity. So that, and the whole idea is the health of the church, the health and the well-being of the church. So that's That's pastor aeternus. That's not what you would get from an Orthodox explanation of the church. They would want to talk more about the commonality of the keys, that Peter's authority is conditional. There's no promise undergirding it to outlast until the end of time. It's good, it's helpful, but it's transitory. It could have been there, it could have gone, and they've been without it now for 1,000 years. So the Orthodox, even the most high papalist Orthodox, and here I'm talking about Bartholomew, Patriarch Bartholomew. Patriarch Bartholomew is the modern day ecumenical patriarch of Constantinople.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. He has a very wide jurisdiction in the Orthodox Church, even over Mount Athos. And he's on the record saying that he doesn't believe there was any difference between Peter and the other 11.
Wow, he said that.
Oh, yeah. When it comes to authority, they were all the same. When it comes to honor, Peter was the first.
Ah, okay. He makes that distinction. Okay.
Yes. But clinching authority, authoritative command that can be issued from Peter to the others, no. Nothing like that. So, I mean, that's the most up to date. That he's the chief of the Orthodox Church, right? The highest primate, even if you define that in purely in terms of, memorabilia, honor, or if you recognize even some sort of an appellate jurisdiction,
right? Yeah,
that covers the whole globe. From Antarctica down everywhere else.
Patriarch of the Penguins.
Even if you see him like that,
right?
He's on the record many times saying that the Roman Church's primacy was a development, that a canonical development, and it doesn't rest upon a divine institution. And so there's no other ecclesiology that exists today that could that could remotely come close to comparing to what Pope Hadrian says in this letter. So some Orthodox might quibble, but he doesn't say anything about ordinary and immediate jurisdiction over the whole world. Well, he doesn't. I mean, the pastor aeternus derives those attributes, those characteristics, from the fact that it was Peter. That Christ gave it immediately to Peter.
Mm-hmm.
He gave the command to shepherd the church of God, feed my lambs. That was a direct command from the King of Kings to Peter. So nothing stands in between the King of Kings and Peter in the fulfillment of that command. So, Peter can't say, well, the Lord told me to feed his lambs, but I've got to make sure with all these metropolitans, I've got to make sure with the patriarch, I've got to make sure. And once I have their permission, then I can obey the Lord. No. So they understood that because it was Christ's command to Peter, nothing can inhibit that. Nothing can stand in the way of that, except for what Peter is bound to be. So he's bound to be a Christian.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
He can't enforce the world to be Islamic, right? So everything that Christ requires Peter to be, that is the extent of Peter's authority. So it's definitely limited because Christ's purpose with the church is limited.
Right.
So the Pope's authority has to be limited in some sense, because Christ's purpose with the church is limited. It's not a free for all, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So I would say Hadrian does teach the ordinary and immediacy of Peter's jurisdiction and his successors. So I would say that it comes just about equal with what is taught in Pastor Eternus.
Wow, that's really good, Eric. And so just to recap, basically, so what you're saying is you're pushing back to the objection that some Orthodox say, and I've also heard it from Anglicans and other types of Protestants and other groups, where if you don't have the specificity of words cited or stated, such as ordinary, immediate jurisdiction, full power, type of distinctions and words that we see from Vatican I, as you just said, it seems to me that their objection is that if the words are not stated as such, therefore, and this seems to be implied to me, and I'll ask for your thoughts on this, therefore, the concept, the doctrine in substance or any other fashion or manner is non-existent, does not exist, is not being taught, etc., etc. That seems to be the inference that they're saying. And it seems to me that that rests on a sort of faulty type of argument, because the very same argument in terms of a principle as a principle used methodologically with a different subject could be applied to the Trinity. And Muslims do make this argument. They will say, where does Jesus say in the New Testament, I am God, worship me? And if you can't prove that in those exact words, therefore, Jesus is not the second person of the Blessed Trinity, begotten by the Father before all ages, consubstantial, God from God, light from light, etc., as we say in the Creed at Mass every Sunday.
Yep.
So help me understand that, Eric. Am I wrong on this, or just because that's my honest,
No, you hit the nail on the head. You hit the nail on the head. No more perfect way could have been hidden. It is definitely this issue of the development of doctrine. If Irenaeus were to somehow get transported through a portal to the 5th century, to hear the church chanting the Nicene Constantinopolitan Creed on the Trinity, he would have, obviously he would have agreed with the doctrine at the end of the day, but he would have needed it. He would have said, look, I'm going to grab a chair and I want you guys to tell me how you've come to this elaborate detail on the Trinity.
Yeah.
Of course, I believe he would agree at the end of the day. Okay.
Right.
I don't want any listeners to think, oh my goodness, he's saying the saints and the Holy Spirit can contradict him. No. But I even think the apostles, if they came into the 6th century, they would have said, I need a chair you're going to have to explain this to me. Right. This is one of those issues with the apostles and the post-apostolic church. You see, some people think, well, the apostles, they knew everything and they taught everything. Well, yes, in substance, right? But we wouldn't say that they literally taught, everything that could be articulated from the apostolic deposit. And because of that, the Holy Spirit leads the church, guides the church, not to make new doctrines, but to penetrate deeper into the meaning and the implication and in the unfolding of the one doctrine that Christ delivered. Well, the apostles were shortened by time. They didn't live past the 1st century. The Holy Spirit continued to live. Right? The Holy Spirit continued to lead the church. So if the apostles were to somehow jump to the 5th century, and if they were to say, look, we need help understanding what you guys are saying, I don't mean by this that somehow the church fathers knew more than the apostles, are there to teach the apostles.
Right. Yeah.
But what I am saying is the apostles themselves would have to recognize, just like Gamaliel recognized, that the Holy Spirit has been driving the church. And so I have to submit to the signature work of what the Spirit has done in the church. And if I can't understand it, I'm going to have to seek to understand it. And I certainly think that would have happened with the apostles to this day. You know, when doctrines that have been dogmatized later, they would probably have to sit there and discern, you know, oh, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You know, it would have been a lot of time for us before we got to that point to be able to articulate this. But yeah, that comes right from what we were saying in the Bible. So, you know, it definitely goes down to that. You know, you don't need there to be ordinary, immediate, direct, full power, you know, plenitudo potestatis. Those are just like we would say hypostatic union, perichoretic, perichoretic union, identity. There's many things that we would say that are dogmatic in the church, that we're not there in the fathers. You know, we're not there in the Bible. So yeah, your argument there is very well stated. You know, but then the question is the ordinary and in immediate nature of the papal government, is that derivable from the Bible and the fathers? You know, so that's another question. But if you can get them over the hump of language and terminology, then we can go on to that next exercise where we try to show that no, what it has to be ordinary, because an extraordinary would be that, you know, Christ created the ordinary way of things, but then there's these emergency extraordinary circumstances. But the thing is, when Christ singled out Peter and called him the rock, gave him the keys, told him to feed the lambs, told him to strengthen the brethren, those were not emergency issues. Those were constitutive of the church. And so they have to be ordinary to the church. So it has to be ordinary. You know, and then is it immediate? Well, the opposite of immediate would be mediated. You know?
Right. Yeah.
And then that goes back to the issue of the King of Kings giving Peter a direct command. What is mediating the fulfillment of that obedience? You know, did Christ say, well, feed my lambs, but you've got to get your permits from the lower government of the church first? No, he gave him a command. The church fathers all understood, you know, not all, but many of the church fathers understood that to mean that he has initiative powers to govern the church. You know, this is not something that he has to wait to obey for. Like St. Leo says, we're like a watchtower, you know, and it's incumbent upon us to act for the sake of the unity of the church. This is one of the reasons why the early popes said that the anxiety of the churches, the care of the churches, is heavy on our shoulders.
Yeah.
That means they're not talking from a point of view where it's like, oh, we can really help, let us come.
Right, yeah.
They're saying, no, we have a responsibility, because, you know, far be it from us, Leo says, if we disobey the Lord, who said, feed my lambs, feed my sheep. That's what Leo says. So that's immediate language. You don't need the word immediate there. But what you have there is an absence of mediatorial subjects before the papal government can take action.
Right.
And so it has to be immediate, you know, and then the whole issue of infallibility comes up. Well, again, you know, the infallibility, just the concept of infallibility is foreign, right, to modern Christians, because today in the Protestant world, the evangelical world, the liberal Christian world, the halls of academia, infallibility is a meet the Muppets word. You know, It's Big Bird. If you say infallibility in the halls of academia today, you look like Kermit the Frog. You know, today, just the term itself is kind of like, oh, it sounds proud. Like
Yeah, yeah.
infallibility, you sound like you're full of pride. You need to be more open-minded, um, well, the infallibility of the Pope is derived from the infallibility of the church. And the infallibility of the church is derived from the infallibility of Christ. Right? So the church is the body of Christ. Right? When Saul is persecuting Christians, Jesus says, "Why are you persecuting me?"
Yeah, exactly. That's significant because it's not it's not because as the whole title for the or purpose of the title for was it Mystici Corpus, the mystical body of Christ, is to it communicates that theme well implicitly, even though it's on other things on magisterial stuff and papal authority and ecclesiology, etc. Yeah, that's very significant that Jesus is saying, why are you persecuting me? And it kind of goes back to his parables and his discussions with the disciples in St. Matthew's Gospel and St. John's Gospel and St. Mark's Gospel and St. Luke's Gospel, where he says how you treat other people reflects how you treat me, where he gives the analogy of, where were you when I was naked? Where were you when I was in prison? Or had no food to eat, etc. Like it's an interesting motif that carries on in that. So sorry for interrupting, but yeah.
No, that's great. And Paul and the apostles, they also understand this. When like at the Council of Jerusalem, when they come to the decision that Gentiles do not need to be circumcised, they say they see the agreement of the apostles and the elders, and they say it seems good to us and the Holy Spirit. So in other words, they understood that the real president at the council was the Holy Spirit, and the decisions that were reached were authored by the Holy Spirit. When Paul tells the Corinthians to excommunicate the sinning man, he says, you, even though I am not present, I am present in spirit. You, by the authority and the power of Jesus Christ, deliver this man over to Satan for the destruction of the flesh. In other words, just like persecuting the Christians is persecuting Christ, whatever the Christian church teaches is what Christ teaches. So just like Jesus came back and said, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? He could equally come back at some other time in a vision and say, have you not read what I taught? Meaning what the church has taught. Because there's that union between Christ and the church, right? So the infallibility of the church comes from this doctrine of the infallibility of Christ. And then linked to that is this further teaching of the infallibility of the Roman pontiff, because the Roman pontiff is given the final authority on matters of faith and morals and discipline. And so when we go through the fathers and they recognize this need for the Pope's approval before things can be like finally settled, well, that's not some pragmatic thing. They understood that to be a design from Jesus. So like, for example, when Peter Chrysologus, or I'm sure I'm mispronouncing it, Chrysologus, Peter Chrysologus, he was a Ravenna archbishop in the 5th century, who's a saint, venerated in the East, venerated in the West. When he had his letter correspondence with Eutychius on the issue of the two natures of Christ, he said, he told him to obey whatever the Pope of Rome says, because Peter continues to live and teach and judge through his successor, right? So that's an apostolic teaching. That's not a pragmatic organization. that's talking about something that was founded with the apostles. So Peter as the head of the church, his successor as the head of the church, the church itself being infallible. The church can't just fragment into different pieces and then paralyze in disunity.
Mm.
The church is infallible, but what that doesn't mean, like what some people mean, where like, well, there's an invisible church that's invisibly infallible when it comes to just the essentials.
Right, right.
That's a highly developed post-Enlightenment Calvinistic way of thinking.
Yeah.
Well, Calvin himself thought that too. So anyway, the church being infallible is a visible infallibility, and in order to have a visible infallibility, you have to have something that's individuated about it in its teaching. So you can't have fragmentation and then constant bickering left and right. So that means the church is hierarchical. And that's what, that's what in the early church fathers, they said that the matters of the faith, that's not delegated to the laity.
Mm-hmm.
The people today that talk about the laity being empowered to teach and all this, there's a place for that. But the early church fathers were very magisterial in their understanding of church government. And
Right.
they knew that it was the bishops that were given the power to teach, the power to judge, the power to, the power of the keys. But those bishops also understood that they are underneath the head, the Pope of Rome. So the infallibility. So the question is, if Christ designed the church this way, but also put it where the Pope can be challenged all the time, just like any other bishop could be challenged. Well, that makes no sense now, does it? That flattens him out with everybody else.
Right. Yeah.
So it really does come down to this issue of the successor of Peter given full power. What that means is that it's unchallengeable, and that's because there has to be a place where the buck stops.
Right. Yeah.
And so it's that distinction between challengeable versus unchallengeable. If we can challenge anything the Pope says, and we can only obey him when we think he's right, well, that's just us obeying us and then allowing the Pope to join us.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So this is where papal infallibility comes in. It's kind of derived from the infallibility of Christ. It's derived from the infallibility of the church, but then also the church being hierarchical in nature.
Mm-hmm.
It hits the top head, which is the successor of Peter. So then it's a question of, does the successor of Peter, as the hierarchical head, is he just as challengeable as everyone else?
Mm.
And if he is, well, then what makes that hierarchical head have any distinguished meaning when it comes to final decision making?
Right. Yeah.
It wouldn't have a difference. So, it's derivable by those means. But it's also stated in scripture. I mean, the rock, that can't be demolished. I mean, if the rock is demolished, then the whole church up top goes demolished, right? So, some of the church fathers employ different rationale, but we would say the ordinary, the immediacy, and the infallibility is all there. Is it unanimous? Of course not. I mean, you have Arianism, you have Nestorianism, you have what was that clan that the Tertullianites went to?
The Montanists.
The Montanists, yeah. You had all kinds of people that had their own ecclesiological ideas.
Yeah.
And they lasted for a long time. The Montanists lasted for a long time. The Quartodecimans,
Yeah, exactly.
They lasted for a long time. Within the one church, you still had some people who wanted to push the issue and were willing to even break communion with the Pope.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not unanimous, but it's substantial enough in the church fathers and in the council documents to win a place at least at the shelf of significant views of the church fathers.
Yeah, that was excellent, Eric. And I have some thoughts on what you said to get your thoughts on it, but I want to table that for now and just kind of do a summary and then move on to sort of a few questions in one that I think is going to require some substantial analysis. But so this is what I was talking about in the last episode that we did together of the ecclesiastical hermeneutic of the Matthean text, where it is the primacy of the Bishop of Rome as primate, as chief of chiefs, and bishop of bishops, to use a phrase that's been used by Saint Cyprian and others negatively against the Bishop of Rome. And so it is the source is, in its ontological origin, as you said, it's from Christ, because Catholic ecclesiology is Christological in that God the Son grants to Saint Peter this authority, which is the basic, essential point of Vatican I, really, to simplify it. The giving of the keys of the kingdom for binding and loosing sins, remitting sins on earth. You cited in the Latin letter from Pope Hadrian I all these references that were very Christological, that referred to the power of God the Son, the eternal Son of God, Jesus Christ, etc., etc. This is essentially, to me, what is the hermeneutic of Western Latin theology in ecclesiology. And yes, there are resistance at various points in the West and in the East, more so in the East, as you said, and we can talk about that for hours on end. But I'm just going to table that for now and kind of give that as my summary. And then one last thing too is in North Carolina and Raleigh, where I was received into the church in Garner, but under the Diocese of Raleigh, the Bishop of Raleigh. And there's a beautiful church that I think was made in the either late 1800s or 1920s or something like that. And it's called Sacred Heart Church. It used to be the Cathedral of Raleigh. Now the Cathedral of Raleigh is the Holy Name of Jesus Cathedral. Also a very beautiful cathedral. And then if you guys want to make a trip down there, go ahead. It's a great place for mass. It's beautiful. And so, but in Sacred Heart Parish, as it's called now, there's a beautiful stained glass of Jesus giving St. Peter the keys. And I'm all for, and obviously from what we've been talking about today and the last episode, nothing against reading on the papacy. But when I saw that stained glass and I saw the light shine through it, I had the intellectual understanding of the papacy from the Catholic perspective. And this was after I was confirmed. So this wasn't like the reason why I became Catholic. I'm not saying that at all. But beauty is still important, and beauty is still powerful, and beauty is still good for your soul. When the light shined through the stained glass and illumined the parish with basically rainbow colors going off on all the other stained glass, which is part of the beauty of stained glass windows at certain times of day when the sun comes up or is going down in the evening. And when I looked at that stained glass window, I was like, I've thought up to this point about the primacy of the Bishop of Rome, but in seeing the beauty of the stained glass window, I felt it, if that makes sense. And I felt it in beauty. And I was like, wow, that's really important. Because at the end of the day, to make it very simplistic, it's really because Catholics believe the things they believe in, especially on the papacy, because we believe Jesus started it. If we didn't believe Jesus started it, we wouldn't believe it. There would be no point. And that's what I want to kind of stress, because there's that beautiful Christological motif of Latin theology on the primacy.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, just wanted to share that experience that I had. And
That's
then
great.
also, yeah, and there's many other beautiful stained glass windows that you can find of the same scene from Matthew's Gospel in chapter 16. It's beautiful. And one of the other things I just wanted to say too before I get to the next question is also, I think I'm forgetting it now. I'm trying to remember what it was. Like, let's say the stained glass thing, and then
you were mentioning that the stained glass it was a depiction, of Matthew the Matthean text, Matthew 16 with the keys. And then you had mentioned that there was light coming through, which is, I think is the fathers do individuate Peter for a reason, and I think that the Catholic interpretation does the best, but it doesn't mean Petrine isolationism.
Right.
This is one of those things that the Protestants and many Eastern Orthodox get wrong, that they think that what's happened here is that basically we've turned Peter and his successors into some sort of like ecclesiastical C3POs.
Yeah.
This automatic, knows everything, papal omniscience, papal automation, just hit the button ex cathedra, and he gives the right answer, and no need to investigate the other bishops, no need to search out the wisdom of the whole church. That's definitely not what the Catholic Church means. But anyway, yeah. So anyway, you did mention that you had other questions, but if you remember that one, we could always come back to it.
I remember it now. So what I wanted to say, just a summary, is that the Catholic Church and the Western view of primacy in specific as well is not only Christological, but it's also in its continuity and perpetuity of the Bishop of Rome, as specified by Vatican I, is pneumatological. There is a guiding and guarding of the Holy Spirit with the Bishop of Rome. Gasser talks about this. St. John Paul II, in his famous Wednesday address, talks about how the Holy Spirit guides and assists the Roman pontiff. The assistance of the Holy Spirit is talked about much by recent popes and in Gasser as well. So just wanted to have that as the bookend capstone for that conversation. Really appreciate your lengthy descriptions of this, Eric. And so this is my next question for you, and it's kind of a lot. So
no worries, don't worry.
Yeah, it is this. Eric, your article is entitled "Comparing the Greek and Latin Texts of Pope Hadrian's Letters. Did the Greek text reject papal supremacy and infallibility?" So my question is, what are these texts? What were these letters of Pope Hadrian? And why did he write them? And then the second part of that is, what is the difference between the Greek and Latin text of Hadrian's letters? What difference, if any? And is it substantial? Does it matter? If there are differences, how does it affect the letters? And so I know this is a little bit repeating and kind of going back on what you were saying before, but if you don't mind, maybe share your screen again and kind of even read the Greek version too. And what would your thoughts on that be, basically?
Yeah. So, like I said earlier today, in 785, Pope Hadrian wrote 2 letters, amongst other things he wrote. But he wrote 2 letters in 785, sent it to Constantinople. It didn't end up getting read until the council convened in 787. And, so the issue here is that, in my studies on this issue is that there is a difference between the Greek version that survives today. So when the Greek codice of the Acts of Nicaea II, in the second session, the certain parts of Hadrian's letters are omitted, and in one letter it's changed quite significantly. And so scholars have wondered why were they changed, and the first one to really that gives us a record on this is Anastasius Bibliothecarius. He's a 9th century Latin linguist. He was an archivist in Rome. That's why he's called Anastasius Bibliothecarius, because Bibliothecarius means librarian, basically. So that's why he's otherwise known as Anastasius the librarian. But he decided to make a fresh translation of the Acts of the Second Council of Nicaea, and he wanted to use the Greek version as the most authentic, because the Latin version had at that time some, not that it was inaccurate, but there was some sloppiness to it, and so they wanted a fresh copy, especially under John the Eighth, Pope John the Eighth. And Anastasius came across these differences in the Latin copies at Rome. Okay, because Anastasius was at Rome. When he saw the Latin copies at Rome, and he saw the Greek version when he was in Constantinople, he recognized differences. But he never thought that the differences that existed had anything to do with papal primacy.
So just quick here, was it more of an analysis and noting that there was a textual variant then, not related to the papacy?
Well, he gives the reasons why he thinks they were modified, but he doesn't notate it at those areas that we would look at today and say, "Oh, look at this." They're rejecting what Hadrian said about Peter and Christ and the keys. No, he makes a note towards the end of Hadrian's letters, where Hadrian's complaining about the title of the ecumenical patriarch of Tarasius, and his complaint about the election of Tarasius, that it was not canonical, that there's problems with it. The council omitted, and Anastasius thinks that the council itself omitted those portions of Hadrian's letter when it was read out in Latin and in Greek at the council, that the papal legates maybe and the Greeks before or after removed those sections of Hadrian's letter because for whatever reason, but the primary reason would be not to impugn the patriarchal status of Tarasius, because here you've got a pope. He's given a bald-faced complaint about Tarasius's election to the patriarchal throne.
Right, yeah.
Kind of embarrassing, maybe inappropriate to Byzantine ears. And so they might have figured, well, this is a diplomatic issue, we'll work around this. And maybe the papal legate said, now that we heard your side of the story, we agree that we should omit that from the text. Anastasius thinks the Greeks did it because of that, and especially because Photius was also ordained quickly. And so it's possible, this is one of the theories that's launched forward by Erick Ybarra, German scholar, one of the great Greek catechologists of our time. He pitches the theory that this was actually done during the Photian scandal. They went back and they erased the complaint of Pope Hadrian to Tarasius in the records of Nicaea II, so that way there would be nothing to be used against Photius. So, and anyway, the long story short is that when Anastasius remarks on the differences between the Latin and the Greek version, he doesn't say anything about, oh, look, the Greeks accepted the Hadrian gave papal claims, the Greeks rejected it. That you don't see that in Anastasius. Yeah. You don't see that until later. Authors are looking at this much later, and they, I think one of the first was Jacques Bossuet, who was a 17th century Gallican theologian, Frenchman.
Oh, okay.
He's one of the famous theologians of the 16th or 17th century, and I think he makes note in his Latin transcription that the Greeks made some significant changes when it comes to the primacy of the Pope, but that's not really going on in Anastasius's day. So I've come to the conclusion that the whole idea that the differences between the Greek and the Latin version, making up some sort of Greek rejection of the papal claims, it's unfounded. It's unfounded, and here's the primary reason. Okay, the primary reason is that, like I said, Hadrian wrote 2 letters. Okay, and the differences that Orthodox apologists today like to talk about between the Greek and the Latin, that's in the first letter to the emperors. And I think we went over the Greek version in our first video, which I don't interpret as a denial of the papacy. All I see there is an addition of the Pauline and Petrine element of the Roman Church. Right. But he's still, in the Greek version, Hadrian is still said to have said that that there's a divine perpetuity to the orthodoxy of the Roman Church. Whereas Orthodox apologists, they like to look at the Greek version and they see Peter and Paul, and they say, "Oh, look at that! If you add Paul to the equation, then that can't mean the Petrine exclusivism of Vatican I." The problem with that is that popes have consistently referred to Paul and Peter.
Right, for centuries.
For centuries, up to the present day.
Yeah.
But they still say, yeah, but, Peter and Paul, it just still doesn't, the Pope and the papacy is just, it's so patronological that if you put Paul in it, it kind of degrades from, the Vatican I type of story.
Yeah, yeah.
But the thing is, if you keep going in the Greek version, it still says that Christ gave exousia, power, to Peter and Paul, not to all the apostles. Okay. We also believe that the keys pertain to all the apostles. Don't misquote me, and we agree. It even pertains to priests.
Right. Yep.
But Hadrian is talking about, or Hadrian is said to have said that, Peter and Paul as a duo, as a unique duo, receive the exousia of Christ in the keys of the kingdom, and that if Hadrian and if Irene and Constantine the Sixth, her son, followed the tradition of the Roman Church, that their empire would be prosperous. And then he goes on to talk about for Peter and Paul, the chief of the apostles, made it a written law that all those who succeed to their thrones, which the Orthodox apologists here say, oh, plural.
Yeah.
Tone thronos, the thrones, the seats of the apostles. So that makes it sound like the whole episcopate, like Africa, Corinth, England, Byzantium. But that's not, the context is talking about the throne of Peter and Paul in Rome.
Right, yeah.
And then it says, all those who succeed to their thrones would hold their faith until the consummation. And this is that other thing that, where the English translation that you see in the Schaff edition, also I've seen some other English translations that put the should in there. So right, the should makes it sound like, oh, the apostles basically are saying that, hey, our successors, they have a moral obligation to keep the faith.
Right. Yeah, and we talked about that in the last episode.
Yeah, but that's so alien to what Hadrian is trying to get at there. If he wrote that Greek version, what he's trying to say is that Rome is supremely reliable. But you don't argue for the unique reliability of Rome by talking about a common moral obligation that everybody has.
That's a good point. Yeah, and that was an objection that I sort of thought up in trying to see how one could object to that passage in the Greek text, to sort of interpret it and synthesize it with more Byzantine conciliaristic theology. And I think you did well in responding to that objection. And, Eric, reading your article on this, it seemed clear to me, just prima facie, reading through both the Greek version and the Latin version that you cited and translated into English, where it seemed clear to me from the context that it's talking about the successors of St. Peter and Paul, not all bishops. So when I first heard that argument from different Orthodox apologists like Craig Trullia, I was a little bit kind of like confused, honestly. And I mean that in sincerity, not trying to be uncharitable or pejorative, but I was kind of confused because I was like, well, I understand in Orthodox thought and theology, there is this argument in terms of the essential divinity and equality of the episcopacy, all bishops are bishops, and so on and so forth, which in that sense, Catholics do believe all bishops are equal in terms of their priesthood. Like, we don't deny that. A bishop is a priest, and a pope is a priest. He just has, in terms of hierarchy and primacy, that's different. And that's where Orthodox and Catholics, of course, disagree. So I guess help me try to understand, Eric, am I off on this? Because I don't understand the objection contextually, because it just seems to me, I don't know, maybe I'm just a simple guy, where when it was talking about Peter and Paul, St. Peter and St. Paul, it's talking about their successors. That's why, and when I formulated my own type of objection on the Greek text, I just assumed the successors of St. Peter and St. Paul. So
yeah, I look, I think the English throws people off, right? It says should believe that those who succeed to their seats, which is another weird translation because it's thronos, right? Or thronon, or I can't remember exactly, but thronon or thronos. Thronos is the singular, thronon is the plural. That's the Greek. It should be translated throne, I think, in English. But it says that those who succeed to their thrones should maintain their faith until the end of time. But the English doesn't really do justice there by adding should, nor does it translate the word end really that well, because that by then the word end there doesn't mean sort of like to the end of their personal lives, like they have to keep it to the end of their lives. So Clement has a moral obligation to keep the apostolic faith until the end of his life, and then the next successor and the next successor, and then you go on to Pope Damasus, and he is morally obligated to keep that doesn't make any sense. The word for end there in the Greek, if you look at the New Testament and other usages in the early church, it's consummatory. It's talking about the wrap up, the final assize, the wrap up of human history. And so what Hadrian is getting at there is something that is, by using that word, he's talking about something that's going to be guaranteed to last until the end. It's kind of like what Christ said, I will be with you always until the end. Same Greek word used in Matthew 28, 28. But I've heard this objection, from other Orthodox apologists. I've heard it from Craig Trullia. This is one of the figures that are on YouTube right now that sort of sound off on, history, church apologetics, things like that, to try and show that Catholicism is not what the fathers taught. And so he kind of mistreats the text here in his article and his presentations that I've seen. So it's been hatched. These objections have been hatched before. They precede Trullia. I think I've seen them in, Father Vladimir Gaute, the Orthodox priest, Frenchman, who wrote the Papacy, the book called The Papacy. You see it in other Orthodox writers. They make note of these things. But if you look at them more closely, if you look at the Greek text more closely, and I've not relied on my own Greek expertise, which I'm still a novice. I've contacted people who translate as a part of their daily lives. And they've, discussed this with me. And, but, it goes back to the issue that there's two letters that Hadrian wrote. The first one is the one where Orthodox look at and say, oh, look at this. They were rejecting the papacy there. But the second letter, both the Latin and the Greek are not touched when it comes to the papal prerogatives. The second one does have a section where the papal prerogatives are omitted, but that's because it's part and parcel with the complaint about the title ecumenical patriarch. So it kind of goes because of that. But then there's another section in the same letter which talks about the papal prerogatives, and they're the same as what we talked about before, in the first letter. So the issue is, if the Greek bishops were on the hunt to get rid of the papal prerogatives, such that they omitted and reworded things in Hadrian's first letter, then they would have done that moments later when they read the second letter out loud in the same session. But we don't see that change. And I could share my screen here to show you.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I'll share my screen here to show you that second letter that Hadrian wrote, that does not have any changes to the actually, this is, I'll go to a different article here. Gotcha. That way you can see what both the Greek and the Latin to this very day have left untouched. And if that if that teaches the papacy, then the whole idea of the Greeks changing the text to deny the papacy, that is completely dissolved. It's nowhere to be found in history, at this time, So let me go to that section.
Oh yeah, please do.
Just scroll down. Okay. Okay, that's not the one. Second place. Yeah, you know what? It might be in the one I was looking at before.
First one, yeah.
Yeah, no worries. I'll just scroll down here and see if I can find it. Okay. Error of dual heads. No, that's not it. Here we go. I'm going to zoom in so that you can see this. So this is the text of Hadrian in his second letter, which was addressed to Patriarch Tarasius. This is what it says in both the Latin and the Greek, roughly speaking, because of the difference between Latin and Greek. But word for word, it's the same if you translate it well. May all the weeds be uprooted from the church. And this is talking about the universal church. And may the word of our Lord Jesus Christ be fulfilled, that the gates of hell will not prevail against it. That's recalling the promise of Christ to the indefectibility of the church. And further, so this is another word of our Lord Jesus Christ. And further, you are Peter, and on this rock I shall build my church, and I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. And whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. His see. Okay, the word see there in the Greek is thronos, and the Latin it's sadis. His see shines forth as primatial throughout the world, and is the head of all the churches of God. Hadrian's talking about the word of the Lord Jesus Christ to Peter, and then immediately goes on to say Peter's throne shines forth as primatial throughout the world and is the head of all the churches of God. In other words, Hadrian understands the Roman church to be founded in the scriptural text of Matthew.
Mhm.
No, I don't know of any other way to read this. So then he goes on. Therefore, this is, therefore, it's an argument. Therefore, the same blessed Peter, the apostle, shepherding the church at the command of the Lord. So this is divine command. This is a divine institution. Shepherding the church at the command of the Lord has left nothing to neglect. This is very important. Has left nothing to neglect, but upholds and has always upheld her authority.
That last point, just want to interject here, but upholds and has always upheld her authority. That's really important as a theological teaching, as a theological motif in Latin, in the Latin theological tradition in the West of the Roman bishops and their view of their primacy. Because, for them, it's not this human thing. And for the life of me, too, Eric, I don't see any other way to read that either. If an Orthodox could demonstrate a contrary reading, then we would be in business, then, hey, okay, let's prove orthodoxy, fine. I want to follow the truth, right?
Exactly.
So it's, but that's just really hard because this is really in this Western continuity of perpetuity in the papacy that eventually, through doctrinal development, culminates at Vatican I. But anyway, I just wanted to add that, and you can continue on.
Yeah, no, and what you're saying is very important because it goes back to what he started at the top. And may the word of our Lord Jesus Christ be fulfilled. And further, the Matthean text is what Hadrian understands to be the word of our Lord. And then the word of our Lord is fulfilled because Peter's see shines forth as primatial throughout the whole world. And here's a very important thing to look at, where it says that Peter, therefore the same blessed Peter the apostle, shepherding the church at the command of the Lord. That's Christ giving Peter a direct command to shepherd the whole church. Right. And then it says, has left nothing to neglect, but upholds and has always upheld her authority. So what that means is that if Peter were to fail, he would have left something to neglect.
Right, by implication. Yep.
Which doesn't accord with the promise that he just read.
Right.
The gates of hell will not prevail against it, and that Peter will have the keys of the kingdom. So this is exactly the same thing we read in Hadrian's first letter, which speaks about the individuation of Peter, the authority of the keys given to Peter, the universal authority that's entailed by it, and the perpetuity of it. It's all divine institution, and therefore it's divinely irreversible. So in the Greek bishops read this, and they didn't change it. They didn't change it. So this is in the second session. So the idea is if the Greek bishops changed Hadrian's first letter because they were trying to reject the papacy, then they would have done that here too.
That's important because, just to sort of recap what you're saying, if the methodological principle as a principle is to not have any high papacy, high primacy stuff, then it would need to be a clean, equal cutter across the board of all references within the text of those letters to all mentions of divine authority having their source as Jesus Christ, giving the Bishop of Rome this prerogative. And to over and against and instead of and in replacement of, to instantiate words of conciliarism or that amount to the sort of proto form of conciliarism, because since at this point in the 8th century, right, we're not at the crystallized form of conciliarism as it developed in 12th, 13th, 14th, and 15th century Byzantium and Russia. And it would be to teach that contra papal theology. And again, I would say this video is not about this, but I would say we could definitely see germs of that theology of conciliarism in the first millennium for sure. No doubt about that. I'm not going to deny that. As we talked about different theologies of East and West in the first millennium in the first interview I did with you.
Yeah.
But it would still seem to hold what I have said. I mean, what do you think I'm off on that, or what do you think?
No, I think you're right on the money. I think that see, the first letter that Hadrian wrote, which has differences, the Greek and the Latin code is different today. The Greek version removes things like that Rome is the head of the whole church. Now, why did the Greeks remove that if they called Rome the head in the second letter throughout the council?
Mm-hmm.
They have no problem calling Rome the head of the churches. But in that section in Hadrian's first letter, it's omitted. It's removed. And so it leaves the historian, it leaves the codicologist, the textual scholars, the manuscript scholars to wonder, why is there differences in Hadrian's first letter if they weren't rejecting the papacy? And I think it's a very good question. I don't think we really have a good answer for it. We've looked at the scholarship of Erick Ybarra, and I've had personal correspondence with him. And he has confirmed to me that his position on the matter is basically exactly what Father Richard Price has said in the commentary and introduction of his translation of the Acts. He's also sent me some of his material, which was written in German. And so I've had to, try and translate that. I don't know German, but I've sought help, especially at key points where I can kind of roughly tell what's going on in his article. But I can't say that I've read all of Lambert's, because he's written a whole section introducing the matter in his first critical edition of the Acts of Nicaea II. So I haven't read all of Lambert's, but I've read some of them, and I've read, and he's pointed me to what confirms his position on the matter. Mm-hmm. I've read Luitpold Wallach, who's a classics scholar. He's the late Luitpold Wallach. He's dead. But he's written a couple of different things on this matter. I have a whole book with articles that were compiled, with his material. And he basically, he agrees with Lambert's in many ways. They believe that at the council, their Greek, the Latin version of Hadrian's letter and the Greek version of Hadrian's letter was the same, word for word from beginning to end. And that changes were made in the record 100 years later under the Photian dispute. Mm. So that's their theory. I don't know if I agree with that. I think it's more plausible than what we hear from guys like Craig Trulia or Orthodox apologists who try to say that the Latins are the ones who interpolated the text, the original text, or that it's strange positions. But what I can say is this: the current Greek record of what Hadrian said in his first epistle is even more papal in my reading. Hmm. So if the Greeks were trying to make changes there, they didn't make changes in the direction of rejecting the papacy. I would say they made changes to accord more with the fact that Peter and Paul brought icons to Constantine, which is part of what goes on after in the section of Hadrian's first letter. So to me, it doesn't seem like the intention was to reject Hadrian's claims at all. So that's what I have to say about that. I think that Orthodox apologists have made they have made something up that didn't exist there for centuries, and so they've put the idea into the matter, and so now everybody's like, oh my goodness, the Greek and the Latin version of Hadrian's letters are different, and oh my goodness, I don't think that existed in anybody's thoughts up until the Orthodox thought they could get some sort of points from it.
Yeah, and just real briefly, can you just summarize again? Because I don't know if I heard it. The audio was caught, but I don't think I heard it myself. Your disagreement with Lambert's on this issue is what exactly again? And Price?
Yeah, so I think that I think it's quite likely that the Greeks may have omitted the complaints about the ordination problem with Tarasius's ordination and the problem with the universal bishop title. I think it's likely that Greeks may have thought that was inappropriate to read out loud in the text of the council. So I think I think it's likely the Greeks may have done it at the council with the agreement of the papal legates. That's possible. But what I don't know if I agree with Lambers and Wallach that the original letters at the council were like word for word equal, or basically, transliterated equal.
Gotcha.
Because they think that the changes happened in the 9th century, with Photius. I don't know if I agree with that. So I think I could tolerate the view that says the Greeks changed the letters at the council, but there was no anti-papal intention in their change.
Right, because that would seem to be a separate issue than the change itself. Because I have it here actually. Hang on, let me see if I can find it. It moved on me. It asked me to refresh, and then the page moved. But
and I should also add, while you're looking for that, that it's not just Lambers and Wallach that have that interpretation. Richard Price takes that interpretation, and there have been other scholars as well that have taken that interpretation that agree with Lambers and Wallach. So they're not just some isolated people that came to that conclusion.
Definitely, I found it, and I appreciate that, Eric. So this is, even though this episode is not on Dvornik and the Photian Schism, I will mention this quote from him on pages 106 through 107 of his work. He says, "The Greeks were in the habit of tampering with pontifical documents, for they did so at the Council of 787 and again in 861 AD." And end quote there. And then I also know, too, that in your Reason and Theology and your show interview with Dr. Richard Price on Nicaea II, from timestamp 8 minutes and 17 seconds to 13 minutes and 30 seconds, that's where you talk about the textual transmission of Pope Hadrian's letters to Empress Irene with Dr. Richard Price. And so I think that from Dvornik kind of feeds into that as well. And I want to, if you don't mind, I actually would probably like to do another episode with you on Nicaea II in relation to the Photian Schism. That could be a whole thing there.
It's a huge conflict there, and iconoclasm, and everything in between. The iconodules, the iconophiles, the iconoclasts. It's a rough history, and it includes the papacy, includes the emperors, and includes the Eastern bishops, and it's a mess.
Gotcha. And so I wanted to, if you don't mind, because we're about to run out of time. You said 10 o'clock, right?
Yeah, that's fine. We can keep going if you have a question. I don't mind at all.
Sure. So let me see. Well, if I can find it. Sorry, everything
Yeah,
keeps.
I was just looking. Oh, I found it. Yeah, I actually found my copy of, and I can just talk for the listeners here, so you can look for whatever you're looking for. But this is Francis Dvornik, his book on Byzantium and the Roman primacy, and I think in one of the footnotes here on the matter of Hadrian, he takes note of the fact that that Hadrian's second letter was not changed by the Greeks. So if you're reading, I found it here. If you're reading this book on page 100, look at footnote 32, and what you'll find is where Francis Dvornik admits that that the bishops at the council at Second Nicaea, they couldn't deny the fact that Peter was the ground of Roman primacy, and I wish you would have elaborated on that more, because according to the modern contemporary Orthodox objection, they're thinking that Paul is added on to the issue.
Right.
Well,
yeah.
Even Dvornik recognizes that Petrine exclusivity does come up later. So.
Yeah, that's true. And I mean, we could do a whole video on both of Dvornik's with multiple videos, but I did find it. And so this will be the last question. And just for everyone watching and listening, so this interview, with the exception of this last question here, of what we've covered so far in this interview, I have, to my satisfaction, covered all of the main questions I wanted to ask you, Eric, about Nicaea II and papal supremacy. Now, in this question that I have for you, and if you're gracious and willing to come on again for part 3, I'd like to go through more objections to your articles, and then also just in general to different arguments on papal supremacy in Nicaea II in 787. And so this is an argument that Craig Truglia has made, and just to let everyone know that, it's my intention not to be pejorative, not to be polemical, not to be uncharitable or bad-spirited at all. I'm none of that. I'm focusing on the content of arguments. That's what I care about, because, like I said before, I care about truth. So, for reference, I will link Craig's debate with Dr. Loukoutis in the description of this video again. But so for everyone listening, the timestamp is from 5 minutes and 37 seconds onward, and through about roughly 15 or 16 minutes there. And this is from out of that time span. So, but basically, my last question for you, Eric, is, what do you think of the argument made by Truglia and other Orthodox that the Greek and not the Latin rendering of the letters of Hadrian was what was read? And that, what do you think of the argument that Lambers and Price are wrong in saying that the Latin text was read aloud at the Council of Nicaea II, that Price and Lambers are the minority of scholars who hold to this view and are wrong? It's novel, it's wrong, and so on and so forth. What do you make of that?
Yeah, so we want to be respectful to those who we disagree with. So I will stick to that code, but, to say that they're the only scholars that have, come to this conclusion is wrong. It's incorrect. I mean, there are several scholars. I can point some out right here. There's a famous book out there. Let's see if this is it right here. Yeah, here's one. Okay. All right. No, same series, but a different book. But those in the know will know the book I'm about to reference. There's a book by a Jesuit, Father Patrick O'Connell. The book is called The Ecclesiology of St. Nicholas Nicephorus of Constantinople. And it's a book that surveys the ecclesiology of Nicholas of Constantinople. He was a patriarch in the 9th century of Constantinople, and it also covers the view of the Studites.
Oh, cool!
Principally the Saint Theodore the Studite. And in that book, he covers the history of Nicaea II. And of course he references Wallach, but he agrees with Wallach and Lambert's. I'm not sure if he brings up Lambert's, actually. I think he does. But in the beginning of the book, if you read the intro to Nicaea II, you have a Jesuit scholar way before Richard Price that agrees with Wallach and Lambert's, or shows that it's very likely. Then you have Professor Thomas Nobles. If you read his book on let me pull it up here.
Yeah, sure.
It's on the issue of iconoclasm. Those who know him will know the book right off the bat. Let me see if it's Thomas F.
Yeah, while you're looking for it, I'll just say that I appreciate you mentioning these books, because I haven't read either of these two. So that will definitely go to my ecclesiology and papacy reading list.
Yeah, it's called Images, Iconoclasm, and the Carolingians. And I provide in my book, I provide references to Nobles' book on this issue, and he refers to a couple of other scholars who make note of this. Now, Nobles himself takes a sort of like a neutral stance on it, but he does comment saying that that it would be very weird for the papal legates to just sit there and let the Greeks change the text.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. So he kind of expresses some curiosity on that point, but he does recognize that the traditional view is that the changes were made at the council, and that the Greek and the Latin versions were not read exactly the same. Okay, but and I'm willing to go with that theory myself. I just don't attribute any anti-papal intention to it, as I mentioned before. So so they're not the only scholars. Lambert's and Wallach are not the only scholars. There are more. But look to Nobles' book on that section. I don't have the page number in front of me, but if you read the section, or if you look in the footnotes or the index for Hadrian I, you'll see what I'm referring to.
Also in your article too.
I think I put it in the article.
Yeah, you cite from Nobles, because I saw the reference there, and I was like, oh, another book I should read, basically. So, but yeah, you mentioned it in your article there, so everyone go check that out. So yeah.
So what I think about Trullia's argument there, as I don't really know what he's arguing. I mean, is he saying that because the letters are different, the versions are different, that therefore the Byzantines rejected the papal claims? Because if that's the argument, I think it puts the Orthodox position in a worse state than it already is. And here's why. Because it would mean that the Greek bishops at the council read the text of the first letter and thought that what was being said was completely unacceptable and unorthodox.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
And if that was the case, then just like they would do with the iconoclasts, just like they would do with the Arians, just like they would do with any other heretic, is they would have assembled some sort of a heresy trial on the claims in that letter. They wouldn't. We couldn't say it was Byzantine flattery that they were taking it as, because if they omitted it, that means that it wasn't the kind of flattery they like. If it was just Byzantine flattery, they would have been more than happy to keep it there. And then, if this is true, then that means that the Greek bishops thought it was heretical. They had to take it out of the text. But then they said Hadrian was Orthodox.
Right. Yeah. And that, golly, we don't have enough time, but like there's more questions on that point that I want to say for a future episode.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So I would say that if we could talk about the difference in the version between the Greek and the Latin of Hadrian's first letter, but if truly his argument is to say, therefore, the Byzantines took out this unacceptable claims of the papacy, then I think that puts the Orthodox in a worse position, because now if they want to say the Greek bishops are like their representatives, like it's their guys, those are their boys, doing what they believe. Well, they externally kept communion with Hadrian.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
And if you want to follow your predecessors, then you should just come into union with Rome today. Because they stayed in communion with Rome despite Rome's unacceptable views of papal authority. Well, you could do the same thing today and be the same as them.
Yeah, and my gosh, there's so much there. Yeah. Well,
and then the final thing I would say is that they didn't change the second letter, which means that if that was the case, that they were trying to, if they were trying to reject the papacy, they got lazy just within a few minutes, because the second letter doesn't have any changes on the issue of the papal primacy, and then, like I said, the Greek version that they did put in its place, in my reading, is more papal than what Hadrian wrote in the Latin. So I think that there's just too many. The evidence mounts against Craig Trullia's argument. He might win the argument that the Greek version and the Latin version was changed at the council, but that has nothing to do necessarily with this issue of rejecting the papacy. That's a whole nother issue.
Right, because like what you're speaking to is not the fact that texts were changed, but what is the underlying substance basis of the motive for their change, which is a more important question, I think.
That's right.
Because that's more revealing and revelatory and significant. So, you put a lot of, your argument that the Greek text is just as strong and stronger than the Latin text in terms of papal primacy and divine institution by Jesus Christ to the Bishop of Rome, puts a lot of, humph and strength to it. Basically, you got a lot of chutzpah, but yeah,
yeah. Now, Hadrian himself, he locked horns with the Franks on this issue, with the veneration of images, and I do believe that Craig Trullia brings up some other points with regard to how the Franks, wrote in the Libri Carolini, the Caroline books, or the books of Charles, literally, and how those books kind of go, they seek to basically tell the Pope that he's exceeded the Roman tradition on the issue of pictures and images. And Hadrian was more of a diplomat on the issue. He didn't excommunicate the Franks. So, that's a whole other issue. There's a lot of history to look at there. And but there's only so much to say in so little time,
Such is life. But with books and reading and time, and then the explication and exposition on books, as the book of Ecclesiastes says, of the making of books, there is no end.
Yes.
But well, everyone, I've been your host, James Stoffinger Jr. This was episode 9 on papal supremacy at the Second Council of Nicaea in 787 with my great guest, Erick Ybarra. Erick, it's been amazing having you on. Is there any plug or anything you want to share with viewers before we end this show?
No, just make sure to watch the first recording, and it'll make sense, much more sense. This one will make much more sense if you do that, and look forward to coming back again.
Definitely, yeah. Love to have you on again for many more multiple parts. Eventually, just for update for everyone, I eventually do plan on making playlists of genres because I have a few episodes on different topics. I have like 2 episodes on Amoris Laetitia. I have 2 episodes now on Nicaea II and Papal Supremacy, and so on and so forth. So there will be playlists created. I'm also working on my logo and design for that. So stay tuned for that. And just quick housekeeping things before we go, and news and other announcements. December 9th, Michael Lofton will be on the show to talk about the Roman Rite and an article he wrote on the recent motu proprio from Pope Francis and about the authority of the Pope to change or abolish the liturgy and things related to that. Stay tuned for that. And then on December 12th, I will have William Albrecht on to talk about the Catholic view of the intercession of the saints, Our Lady of Guadalupe, and Our Lady under the title of the Immaculate Conception. So everyone, thank you for tuning in. Please like, comment, subscribe, sharing your social media to everyone. Help the little baby channel grow. Let it become a big boy. And so stay tuned for that. And if you're Catholic, happy Advent. And if you're Orthodox or Eastern Catholic, happy Nativity. So have a great night, and God bless you all. Thanks again, Erick. Love you.
You too.